The decision to spin Genesis off into its own brand is either genius or genuinely mad, depending on who you ask. The pessimists out there are going to point out that it's the ultimate uphill battle in today's auto industry. And then you have the optimists that are going to say, hey, it's got the best of both worlds. A fresh start to give customers exactly what they want and the know-how to do it all right the first time. Either way you look at it, there's no denying the brand has been making a name for itself, and it's been doing it without an SUV. Well, that all changes with this new GV80, and guess what? It's pretty damn good. The whole idea behind Genesis is a bit like if your favorite chain of burrito places decided to take on that fancy steakhouse down the street. It's not that it can't be done, it's just a little bit crazy to even try it in the first place. But what's even crazier is how successful it's been to this point. Now granted, sales don't look all that good, but that's to be expected through the first few years. But if you take a look at the product range, everything the brand has built to this point has been ready to go toe-to-toe with established names like Mercedes-Benz right out of the gate. Only this GV80, it's a better first attempt at an SUV than any of the cars that came before it were at being luxury sedans. Just let that sink in for a minute. I mean, take a look at the G70. That is a great car, and it's racked up all kinds of awards since it launched, including a few from Autotrader.ca. It's a legitimate contender to go up against cars like the Mercedes C-Class or the BMW 3 Series, but it's not without a few shortcomings. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail since you can go back and watch that G70 review once you're done here, but just take the infotainment system. It doesn't look or feel all that different from something you can get in a Hyundai Elantra, and it doesn't make for much of a showpiece in a premium product. And I also saw some of the grumpy comments out there after I pointed out that the materials and plastics in the G70 just aren't up to the standards of a premium product. And that's still a little bit true here, but it's way less of a problem, with two glaring exceptions. Just take a look at these signal and wiper stocks. This black plastic contrasts against all this ivory in the worst way possible. Just kind of makes it look like an afterthought. It's almost like these are replacement parts and they didn't have them in matching colors, but they decided to slap them in here anyway. Now, don't get me wrong, Mercedes does the same thing, but for some reason it just stands out way more in this GV80. I know it might seem like a small nit to pick, but you do look at them every time you're behind the wheel. And again, they just stand out for all the wrong reasons. But I do have to say just about everything else in here is done really well. And the same goes with the overhauled G80. You know, that thing went through some similar growing pains to the G70. A lot of the controls inside didn't feel that far off from a Hyundai, and that made it hard to stand out in the premium space. But it looks very good, and the same goes with this. You could take the steering wheel off and replace it with an Audi one, and most people wouldn't even know the difference. I'm driving the loaded version of the GV80, so there's all kinds of stuff you would expect, plus a few gimmicks to help it stand out. Just take this digital gauge cluster, it's got this cool kind of 3D effect to it. Plus there's a really awesome blind spot monitor that pulls up a live look of either side of the vehicle when you use your signal. I love it. It really helps in the safety front, but it's a cool feature as well. And then there's this awesome infotainment system that has this ultra-wide format. The other cool thing is when you pull up Google Maps, it actually spans most of the entire screen. I love that. If you take a look at Mercedes, it started putting similar screens in its products recently, but when you use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, you don't get this widescreen format. Hyundai's really done it right. Yeah, it saves a little bit of the space off to the side for the clock, but you still get about 10 inches of real estate to use for your Google Maps. Though I will point out I have one issue this week, and that's Apple Music has just mysteriously hit pause on me while I've been cruising around. No rhyme or reason to it, not really sure what's going on, and I hope it's not a lingering issue for people, because those little niggles are issues that can cause big problems down the road. They can be big irritants, but for the most part, I haven't had any issues with this infotainment system. It's also got some great features built right into it, like a cool quiet mode that helps you isolate the sound to the front speakers if the kids are sleeping in the back. Those seats are pretty comfortable and spacious too, and I wouldn't mind spending time back there on a road trip, except there's no massage function, and I've got that going on with this driver's seat. Though I will point out, it's kind of strange, but there's no massage function for the front seat passenger. And the other thing is, there's no indication that there's massage in this infotainment system. When I picked it up, I resigned myself to the fact that there was no massage in this thing, because when I went through the different menus here, I couldn't see any settings for a massaging seat. And it was only when I was taking photos of this thing a couple hours later that I noticed this little button down here on the side of the seat. Now, I know if you own this thing, you should be diving into the owner's manual at some point, so you're going to discover that stuff on your own. But I do have a problem that it's not obvious. Stuff like that should be very easily accessible, and you should be able to check it out through this infotainment system instead of this tiny little button on the side of the seat that you can't really see. You have to kind of feel around for it, and that can be a bit of a distraction. Again, it's just a small nit to pick, but it's worth pointing out. A couple more points about those back seats. Well, they're heated, and that is standard equipment in every version of the GV80. And you also get separate HVAC controls on the back of the center console, so people in the back seat can control their own temperature. And then the one I'm driving, well, it has ventilated rear seats as well. I love to see that. Now, the top two trims of the GV80, they come with a third row of seats, though they're a bit like trying to squeeze into the back of a Ford Mustang. Not exactly recommended. There's even more room in the third row of seats in the smaller Mercedes GLB class. Obviously, the big difference between that little Benz and this thing is their shapes. That is really boxy and upright, whereas this is sleek and stylish. I love the way the roof line slopes towards the back, but that means it's really compromised when you get back here. If you're talking about cargo room behind this third row of seats, well, it's pretty useless. And the same goes with those seats themselves. There's not much headroom. Now, I suspect most people are going to keep those seats stowed in the floor most of the time anyways, and in that configuration, you have about 1,000 liters to work with, so pretty good room. Now, the other thing is there's all kinds of quick release buttons so you can reconfigure the space in a hurry, which is great. The other great thing is the styling. Whether you're talking about inside or out, I think Genesis nailed this one. I'm not quite sold on the split lights you get all around the outside, but everything else about it looks great, especially that front end. And a lot of people have had great things to say about it all week, except for one friend of mine who usually has bad opinions about cars anyways. And you know, I'm not one to name names, so I'm not going to do that here, but you know who you are. It's Brad. His name's Brad. So on to the drive. Now, like I said, this is the fully loaded version of the GV80. So I've got a twin turbocharged V6 under the hood, and it makes 375 horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque. That's plenty for an SUV like this, and this powertrain is really smooth too, though I will point out it's not especially efficient. I've been burning more than 13 liters per 100 kilometers this week, and that's premium grade gas too. Granted, that's not terrible considering it's winter time and this thing has all-wheel drive, but I was expecting a little bit better this week. Something closer to about 10 liters per 100 kilometers would make a lot more sense, or something a little bit closer to the official ratings provided by Genesis. Then again, there is a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine if fuel efficiency is a concern to you, though you don't get all the good stuff you get in here, like this digital gauge cluster. The ride quality is excellent too. I'd put this as the perfect blend between a BMW and a Lexus. It's not quite as dynamic as an X5, but it's got all the comfort you'd expect from a Lexus RX or even a GX. And this one I'm driving, well, apparently it uses a forward-facing camera to detect bumps and stuff in the road to adjust the dampers before you even hit them, and it is buttery smooth. I'd put this as one of the most comfortable SUVs you can buy right now. It's also pretty quiet too, though there is quite a bit of wind noise coming off of these door mirrors today. I also really like this steering too. Now, granted, there's not a ton of feel, but as far as weight and resistance goes, it is really nice, even in eco or comfort modes. And speaking of which, there are a few drive modes you can spin through with this dial on the console. And there's also a controller here for the infotainment system, since it's a bit of a stretch from the driver's seat. And I like the fact that you have both. There's this controller as well as the touchscreen. Not all brands give you that, so I like that Genesis gives you the choice of both. Now, speaking of those drive modes, even in sport, this thing doesn't feel especially quick. Granted, I'd say it's quick enough, but it's not going to keep up with something like an AMG-tuned Mercedes GLE. But again, I do think this is a nice blend of sport and comfort. Okay, so let's talk about price. Now, the cheapest one with that 4-cylinder engine starts at $64.5 grand, and you do get a lot of good features for the money. Heated front and rear seats, this massive touchscreen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 12-speaker stereo, and all kinds of advanced safety features. There's even a lane centering function for the adaptive cruise control, though I'm not so crazy about it. It's just not very smooth, especially if you compare it to something like the system in the Nissan Rogue that's less than half the price. But it is pretty easy to shut it off with a simple press of a button, and you still get adaptive cruise control, and that goes with lane keep assist, automatic emergency braking, and all the rest. Very cool package for the price. Obviously, there are a bunch of other extras for the money as you work your way through the trims right up to this loaded Prestige version. And this is $85,000 before tax, but comes with all kinds of good stuff. You get the big engine, this digital gauge cluster, even upgraded leather seats. There's also Hyundai's Smart Park system, though it is a bit hokey, but it gives you something to show off to your friends. Hey friends, check this out. Go on, little guy. Go on. Show them your cool little party trick. That's right. You got this. Work it. Work it. Okay, we're good there. So, pretty cool, right? And then there are ventilated seats in the first and second rows, as well as this massaging driver's chair and a suede headliner and even soft closed doors. It all adds up to give this a proper premium SUV experience. To recap, I like the way the Genesis GV80 blends sport and comfort so well, the way it feels like a proper premium vehicle with all the features it offers and the standout styling. I don't like that it still has some Hyundai style controls, that it's not all that efficient, and that the third row is pretty useless. To put that price into perspective, a BMW X5 starts at $73,500, only it doesn't come with anything close to what you get in here. To do that, you're gonna have to spend more than $90,000. And that's always been the Genesis way, and it predates before it was its own brand. Build a competitive product, only charge way less than the competition does. Only this time around, it doesn't feel like the GV80 makes any sacrifices considering the money it saves. And if it proves anything, it's that this brand really knows how to do luxury right.